I heard her before I saw her. My granddaughter's voice, small and certain, the way only a 6-year-old can be, carrying across the parking lot of the Waffle House on Clement Street like it had somewhere important to be. "Mommy, are we going to sleep here?" I came around the front of my car, and there they were. My daughter sitting on top of a rolling suitcase with a canvas duffel bag at her feet, and a black garbage bag full of what looked like winter clothes pressed against the curb behind her. My granddaughter was leaning against her mother's arm, clutching a stuffed rabbit by one ear, watching a pickup truck reverse out of a nearby space with the focused attention only exhausted children can manage. My daughter looked up. The expression on her face was something I hadn't seen since she was 17 and got into her first car accident, that particular mixture of shame and relief that comes from needing someone and not wanting to. I didn't say anything about being right. I had been right. I had told her 2.5 years ago, sitting at my kitchen table over cups of tea she barely touched, that his mother was the kind of woman who smiled at you while quietly removing every board from the floor beneath your feet. My daughter had squeezed my hand and said, "Mom, you always expect the worst from people." I hadn't argued. There was no point. She was in love, and love has its own logic, and no amount of reasonable conversation can touch it until it's ready to be touched. I said, "Come on, baby. Let's get the bags in the trunk." My granddaughter looked up at me with those big brown eyes that were still puffy around the edges, in the way that told me she had been crying the night before and had stopped and then started again. "Grandma," she said seriously, "we have a lot of bags." "I see that," I said. "Good thing I drive a big car." She considered this and then nodded and picked up the duffel bag by both handles and dragged it toward the trunk with great determination. I watched her for a moment, and then I looked at my daughter and she looked at me, and I could see the exact moment she stopped holding herself together. I stepped forward and put my arms around her, and she leaned into me the way she used to when she was small. And I held her there in that parking lot in the middle of the morning while my granddaughter struggled with the zipper on the trunk, and a family of 4 walked past us talking about whether to get the hash browns scattered or smothered. We stood there for as long as she needed. On the drive back to my house, she told me most of it, though I could see her leaving pieces out, smoothing the edges the way she always had, trying to make things sound less bad than they were, because she had always believed that if he described something calmly enough, it might start to feel calm. His mother had called her into the sitting room 2 mornings ago. Not a conversation, a verdict. She said my daughter had never been the right fit for the family, that she had come from a different kind of people, that her son had worked too hard and built too much to have everything he'd accomplished attached to someone who didn't understand what it meant to carry a name. She used the phrase trailer trash who got lucky exactly once, in a tone so even and composed you might have thought she was reading from a menu. And then she had smoothed the front of her blazer and asked my daughter how much time she would need to pack her things. Her husband had been in the house. Upstairs, she thought, though she couldn't be sure. He had come into the bedroom about 20 minutes later, while she was standing in the middle of the room not moving because her body had not yet understood what her mind was being asked to accept. He sat down on the edge of the bed and he told her that his mother wasn't wrong about everything, that they had been struggling for a while and maybe some distance would give them both clarity, that he needed space to figure out where things stood. She had not screamed. She told me this in the car with something close to amazement, like she herself couldn't fully believe it. She had just kept folding things and putting them in the suitcase and not looking at him until he left the room. She had picked up my granddaughter from school that afternoon, driven to her sister-in-law's house and sat in the driveway for 15 minutes before going to the door. Knocked twice. She could hear the television inside. The door stayed closed. She had gone back to the car and driven to the Waffle House because it was lit and the parking lot was visible from the street, and she had been too tired to think of anywhere better. She hadn't called me until the next morning. "I didn't want you to worry," she said. "I know," I said, "and I didn't want you to. I'm not going to say it." She turned to look out the passenger window. The Georgia pines went by in a long, slow green blur. "His mother had me fired from the company too," she said. "I found out this morning when I turned my phone back on. HR sent an email. My position has been eliminated effective immediately." She said it with the careful flatness of someone who had already cried about it and was not going to cry about it again in a car. 3 years. I was good at that job. She had been. She worked in acquisitions at his family's real estate investment firm, and she had been genuinely good at it. I had seen the way she talked about properties, the way she read a market, the particular precision she brought to things when she cared about them. His mother had been on the board of that firm since his father's passing 2 years prior. She had moved quietly, and she had moved thoroughly, and in the space of one morning she had taken my daughter's home, her income, and the ground under both feet. I kept my hands on the wheel and my eyes on the road. "Mom," my daughter said, "I know what you're thinking." "You don't," I said. I'm not thinking anything right now. I'm just driving us home. That was a small lie. I was already thinking quite a lot. My granddaughter fell asleep in the back seat somewhere around exit 14. I carried her up to the guest room while my daughter brought the first load of bags inside, and I got her shoes off and pulled the blanket up around her shoulders, and she rolled toward the wall with the automatic trust of a child who knows she is somewhere safe. Just before I turned to go, she murmured, without fully waking, "When is Daddy coming?" I stood there in the dark of the room for a moment with that question sitting in the air between us. "Soon, sweetheart," I said, because she was already half asleep and because some answers belonged to a different conversation on a different day. I went downstairs and found my daughter at the kitchen table, both hands wrapped around a mug of tea she hadn't made herself. I had made it for her while she was bringing in the bags. Steam rose from it and she stared at it like she was waiting for it to tell her something. "You don't have to figure anything out tonight," I told her, sitting down across from her. "I know." She looked up. "Mom, she took everything." The house. It was always in his parents' name. I didn't know they'd never transferred the deed. I just assumed she could just walk in and tell me to go, and there was no legal. I had nothing to push back with. She stopped. Started again. She did all of this, and she just straightened her blazer and went to get her hair done. I looked at my daughter's face. 34 years old, and she looked about 19 right now. Not young in a good way, but young in the way of someone who has just discovered that the world does not operate by the rules they thought it did. She thought she could do it cleanly, I said. Something in the way I said it made my daughter look at me a little differently. She had known me her whole life as a retired school teacher who kept a neat house on the east side and drove a sensible car and brought a pound cake to every gathering she attended. She knew I was steady. She knew I was practical. What she did not fully know, because I had never made it her concern to know, was the rest of it. "Get some sleep," I said. "I'll make eggs in the morning." I had not always been only a school teacher. Before that, I had been a young woman in Atlanta in the mid-1980s with $200 in a savings account, a part-time waitressing job, and a very clear understanding that no one was going to come along and hand me a life. I had watched my mother work herself to exhaustion for other people's households, and I had decided, at 22, sitting at my own small kitchen table with a legal pad and a ballpoint pen, that the one thing I could control was what I did with every dollar that passed through my hands, and how I used the years I had. I taught school for 31 years, and I loved it. Genuinely, in the way you can love work that is difficult and necessary and sometimes thankless. I also bought my first piece of property at 28-428, a duplex on the east side that nobody else wanted because the roof needed work. And I fixed the roof myself with help from a man my father knew. And they rented both units and used that money to maintain the property and then to buy another one. Then another. Then a small commercial strip on the north end of Clement Street that I purchased in 1994 for a number that made my own attorney raise an eyebrow, because the neighborhood was considered declining and the storefronts were mostly vacant and everything about the purchase looked, from the outside, like a mistake. I had held it. I had maintained it. I had waited the way you wait for a garden you have already planted, understanding that patience and passivity are not the same thing. By the time I retired from teaching, that strip on Clement Street was worth considerably more than anyone who had known me at 28 might have predicted. There were other properties too. A warehouse space on the south end, 2 office buildings, one managed directly, and one through a partnership. A portfolio that I had built quietly, piece by piece, over the course of 35 years, without announcement, without anyone in particular needing to know. My daughter knew I was comfortable. She did not know the specific shape of comfortable. His mother absolutely did not know any of it. She had looked at me at family dinners, at Thanksgiving tables and Easter brunches and the birthday parties for my granddaughter, where we had occupied the same rooms with careful civility, with an expression I had catalogued and filed away without comment. Not rude enough to be impolite, just distant enough to communicate, clearly and consistently, what she thought of me. A retired school teacher from the east side. Acceptable as background, not quite worth full attention. I had never corrected that impression. There had been no reason to. Now there was a reason. I called my attorney the next morning, early, before my daughter came downstairs. She had been my attorney for over 20 years. A woman named Clara, who was sharp and unhurried, and who had handled every lease negotiation and title transfer and partnership agreement in my portfolio without ever making me feel like the numbers were too small to matter. I told her what had happened. I told her what I needed. "Give me a few days," she said. "Take what you need," I said, "but be thorough." I also made a second call to a woman I had known since our daughters were in the same elementary school class. She worked now in the Georgia Secretary of State's office in the division that handled charitable organization compliance. We hadn't spoken in about a year. She was happy to hear from me. I told her I had been considering a donation to a foundation and wanted to understand more about their financials before committing. The Harold Whitfield Memorial Foundation, established in memory of his father, who had died 2 years prior of a cardiac event. I said I liked to do my due diligence and wanted to know what the public records looked like. All 990 filings are public records, she told me. I'll walk you through where to find them. I wrote down everything she said and thanked her and made a cup of coffee and sat at my kitchen table with my legal pad. The foundation office was on the second floor of a professional building on Lenox Road, in a suite with new carpet and a waiting area furnished in a way that said money without quite saying whose. I went on a Wednesday afternoon, parked in the visitor space. Went up in the elevator with my leather portfolio under my arm, the one I used to carry to school board meetings, and told the young woman at the front desk that I was considering a significant charitable gift in memory of a family member and that I always like to visit an organization in person before making any commitments. She was warm and helpful and brought me water in a small glass bottle with the foundation's logo on it while she went to see if the director was available. I sat and looked around. The furniture was new, not quality new, not the kind of thing you buy to last 20 years, but recently purchased and expensive in a specific way that suggested someone had been to a showroom and pointed at things without looking at the price tags. The art on the walls was decorative and not cheap. The brochure on the side table was glossy and thick. I picked it up and read it carefully, the way I read every document someone hands me. The numbers inside were interesting. For every $3 listed as program expenses, community grants, scholarships, educational initiatives, there was nearly $1.50 in administrative and operational costs. That ratio would not have passed the review of anyone who knew what to look for. The director came out and was professional and articulate, and clearly very good at her job. I asked questions about the foundation's annual gala, about which board members were most active in day-to-day decisions, about how funds were allocated between programs and administration. She answered everything smoothly. When I mentioned his mother by name, she said, "Oh, Mrs. Whitfield is really the driving force behind everything. She's here multiple times a week. This foundation is her whole heart." "That's admirable," I said. "You can always tell when something is personal." She agreed enthusiastically and gave me a second brochure with her business card clipped to it, and I thanked her and took the elevator back down and sat in my car in the parking lot for 10 minutes, making notes on my legal pad before I drove home. Clara called 4 days later. "Your property at 2020 Clemens Street," she said. "Suite 4B, the boutique." I waited. The tenant is registered under a holding company called Magnolia Grace Properties, LLC. Magnolia Grace Properties is listed as a subsidiary of Whitfield Family Holdings. I set down my coffee cup. "His mother's boutique," I said. "She has been renting from me." "For 6 years," Clara said. "At below market rate. The long-term lease was negotiated by your previous property manager before you brought that building under direct management 3 years ago. She has never inquired about the ownership structure. She pays rent to the LLC, and the LLC has never had occasion to introduce itself." I looked out the window. My granddaughter was in the backyard drawing something in chalk on the patio, her tongue between her teeth in concentration, her stuffed rabbit propped against the step beside her. "When does her lease come up for renewal?" 90 days from the end of this quarter," Clara said. "And the foundation? That's where things get more interesting." Clara paused in the way she did when she was about to say something she wanted me to hear carefully. The 990 filings for the last 2 fiscal years show a pattern of expenses that don't hold up under scrutiny. Consulting fees paid to entities that have no web presence and no registered addresses. Travel expenditures for board members that exceed anything a foundation of this size would normally carry. A recurring line item for event production that appears, when you trace it backward, to overlap significantly with personal entertaining expenses for one household in particular. Another pause. I flagged it with someone who handles these reviews formally. "Thank you, Clara. Are you sure about all of this?" She asked it the way she always did. Not as a warning and not to dissuade me, just because she had known me long enough to ask. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. The Whitfield Foundation annual gala was held on a Saturday evening in October at the Biltmore Hotel. $400 a plate, black tie, the kind of event where the room itself was the point. I had purchased 2 tickets. I wore a dress I had owned for years. Deep blue, simple, the kind of thing that photographs cleanly and tells no one anything. Clara came as my guest. We arrived at 7, had our photographs taken at the entrance, and went in. His mother was near the center of the room holding a champagne flute and wearing something floor-length and ivory that managed to communicate that the evening had been organized in her honor, even though technically it had not been. She was moving from cluster to cluster of guests, with the practiced ease of a woman who had been working a room for 30 years. She saw me about 20 minutes in. I watched it happen. The small disruption in her composure, quick as a blink, there and gone in under 2 seconds, replaced immediately by the smooth and pleasant expression she kept in reserve for precisely these situations. She crossed the room toward me with the unhurried confidence of a woman approaching territory she owns. "What a surprise," she said. The warmth in her voice was architectural, constructed to precise specification. "I didn't know you were interested in the foundation." "I've been doing my research," I said. "I like to know exactly what I'm supporting before I commit to anything." She looked at me. She was trying to identify the angle. She couldn't find one because there was no angle visible. That was the design. "I'm glad you're here," she said, in a tone that communicated clearly that she was not. "How is my son-in-law?" I asked. A flicker. "He's well, managing through a difficult period." "And the firm?" Another flicker, smaller and faster. "Fine, very strong quarter." "Good to hear," I said. I smiled. "I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening." She held my gaze for one more moment, looking for the thing she couldn't find. And then she excused herself and moved away toward a group of people near the bar. And I watched her go. Clara leaned slightly toward me. "She has no idea," she said quietly. "No," I said. "How does that feel?" I thought about the parking lot on Clement Street. My granddaughter asking if they were going to sleep at the Waffle House. My daughter's voice on a 17-second voicemail, careful and quiet the way that only comes from trying very hard not to dissolve. I thought about a woman sitting across the table from my daughter and using a specific phrase in a specific tone and then smoothing the front of her blazer. "It feels like the moment just before harvest," I said. The lease non-renewal notice went out on a Monday. Standard language, professional, nothing personal in it. The property management company handled it. My name was not in the letter. By Wednesday, I heard through Claire that his mother had begun making calls, trying to trace the ownership of the building, trying to find a contact who could explain the decision and perhaps reverse it. By Thursday, she had apparently found her way to the management company. By Friday, there was a message asking whether there was any possibility of discussing renewal terms. Clara called to ask how I would like to respond. "Tell them the decision stands," I said, "and wish them well." The foundation news came 10 days later. The Secretary of State's office had opened a formal compliance review. It was not yet public, but it would be. The irregularities in the filings were sufficient to trigger an audit. There would be accountants going through every line item. There would be board members asked to explain consulting fees paid to entities that did not appear to exist. There would be a process, and the process would follow the evidence wherever the evidence led. My son-in-law came to my house in late October. He called first. He sat at my kitchen table in a jacket he'd clearly put on carefully, and he told me that he had not known the full extent of what his mother had planned, that he knew there were tensions and he should have done more to address them, and he was sorry for the position my daughter and my granddaughter had been put in. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Did you know she was on the board when my daughter was let go?" He looked at the table. "That's not a no," I said. He didn't answer right away. "I need you to understand," I said, not unkindly but very clearly, that there is a difference between not knowing something and not asking. I think you're a man who understands that difference, and I think when you look at the last 3 years, honestly, you'll know which side of that line you were on. He looked up. His face had the particular quality of a man receiving something he had known was coming. "My daughter has a good attorney," I said. "Whatever happens between the two of you, she will be fine. My granddaughter will be fine. I am less interested in your apology right now than I am in what you're going to do going forward. Those are 2 different conversations." He nodded. "Then we understand each other," I said. My granddaughter asked me one afternoon in November, sitting at my kitchen table with a half-eaten grilled cheese in front of her, whether our family was going to be okay. She was 6 years old with a loose front tooth and a stuffed rabbit she carried everywhere and a particular habit of asking me exact questions no one else in the room was willing to say out loud. I sat down across from her. I thought about the right thing to say. Not the comfortable thing, the right thing. "Yes," I said, "we're going to be okay. Even with everything that happened, even with everything." She tilted her head to one side the way she did when she was working something out. "Because you fixed it. Because your mom is strong," I said. "I just helped a little." She seemed to consider this, weigh it, find it acceptable. She picked up her sandwich and took a large bite and said through it, with the total confidence of someone stating an obvious fact, "You're pretty strong too, Grandma." I smiled. "Eat your lunch," I said. His mother vacated the critique by the end of the quarter. The foundation suspended operations pending the state audit. 3 of the 5 board members resigned within 6 weeks of the review becoming public. Two investors in the family's real estate firm quietly withdrew their positions in the fourth quarter, citing a need to reassess certain partnerships in light of ongoing legal matters. My son-in-law left the firm in December. He and my daughter had long conversations that I imagine were difficult in the way that real things always are. I don't know everything that was said between them. I know that my granddaughter began seeing both her parents on a regular schedule and that she stopped asking when she was going home because she understood now, the way children understand things once the adults around them stop pretending otherwise, that this was home. My daughter found a job in January with a real estate development company on the west side of the city. She called me after her first week, and her voice had that particular quality it gets when she is exactly where she is supposed to be. She was good at what she did. She had always been good at what she did. The only thing that had ever stood between her and knowing that was a woman who had decided, for reasons that said everything about her own fears, and nothing whatsoever about my daughter's worth, that she was not enough. She came home one evening in February with takeout from the Thai place my granddaughter had recently decided was the best restaurant in the world, and the three of us ate at my kitchen table and talked about school and spring, and whether the rabbit needed a name upgrade since he'd been known as simply Rabbit for 3 years, and that seemed insufficient. "I've been looking at apartments," my daughter said carefully. "I know," I said. "I've seen the browser tabs." She laughed. It was a real laugh, unconstrained, the kind that takes up space in a room. I had not heard that laugh enough in the past 2 years, and I was glad to hear it now. "There's a 2-bedroom on Fairfield Avenue," she said. "Good school district. Nice light. Show me this weekend," I said. My granddaughter looked between us. "Are we moving again?" "You are," I said. "To your own place. Your mom's place." She processed this with the thoroughness she brought to important matters. "Can I still come here on Saturdays?" "Every Saturday you want," I said. "No exceptions." She nodded once, settled, and returned to her pad CU with the satisfaction of a negotiation that had gone well. "Okay," she said. "That's good then. People misunderstand patience. They think it is waiting without acting. It is not. It is acting carefully, in the right order, at the right time, without announcing yourself before the work is done. It is knowing the difference between the moment for noise and the moment for silence, and understanding that silence is not surrender. It is preparation." His mother had spent decades arranging the world around a hierarchy she believed was fixed and permanent. She had looked at me across dinner tables for years and seen a retired school teacher who drove a sensible car and brought pound cake to holidays. She had made her calculations accordingly. She had looked at my daughter and made the same calculation and acted on it without hesitation, because she believed she understood exactly what both of us were and exactly what either of us could do. What she had not accounted for in all of her calculations was the possibility that the woman she had looked through for 3 years was quietly holding a piece of the ground she was standing on. I want to be clear that I take no pleasure in what happened to her. I mean that. I did not enjoy the audit or the legal proceedings or the photograph of her in the local business journal alongside a story about the foundation's suspension. I did not enjoy watching a family fracture along the lines that had always been there, but that no one had wanted to acknowledge. There is nothing enjoyable about any of that. But I had stood in a parking lot on Clement Street and watched my daughter sitting on a suitcase with a garbage bag of winter clothes at her feet. And I had watched my granddaughter drag a duffel bag toward the trunk of my car with both hands because she was determined to be useful. And I had made a decision on the drive home that was quiet and complete and not angry, just clear. Some things, once done, cannot be undone. That is true in every direction. She had made her choices. I had made mine. The difference was that I had made mine over 35 years, one careful decision at a time, and she had not known I was making them. What I would say to anyone who needs to hear it is this. The people who look at you and decide you are not worth seeing have already told you everything about themselves that matters. You do not need to argue with them. You do not need to convince them or correct them or make them understand what they've missed. You only need to keep going, keep building, keep planting, in the quiet, in the years when no one is watching and nothing looks like it's happening yet. Be ready, when the season finally comes, to let the garden speak. Mine did, and I was ready.